Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Purudikacharya Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Purudikacharya Ashtottara to the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Alex, I think this may be a little loud for Vijay. Just a touchdown. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 4th day of November 2020 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in Chapter 3, Karma Yoga, and text 17 on page 155. Text 17. We did 16. Okay. Yastvatmanatadeva syad atmatriptascha manavaha atmanyeva santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yastvatmanatadeva syad atmatriptascha manavaha Atmanyeva santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yastvatmanatadeva syad atmatriptascha manavaha atmanyeva santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yastvatmanatadeva syad atmatriptascha manavaha Atmanyeva ta santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Good. Yastvapnanatadeva syad atmatriptas tamanavaha atmanyeva sachantushtas tasya na vidyate. Glenn, you go next. Yatsvatnanatadeva syad atmatriptas tamanavaha atmanyeva satantushtas tasya vidyate. Yasvatnanatadeva syad atmatriptas manavaha atmanyeva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Ed, you want to try? Yastvapnanatadeva syad atmatriptas manavaha atmanyeva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. Yaha, one who, two, but, atma ratihi, taking pleasure in the self, eva, certainly, syat, remains, atma triptaha, self-illuminated, cha, and manavaha, a man, atmani, in the self, eva, only, cha, and santushtaha, perfectly satiated, tasya, his, karyam, duty, na, does not, vidyate, exist. Notice the cap S on that self, indicating Krishna. But one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. Purport. A person who is fully Krishna conscious and is fully satisfied by his acts in Krishna consciousness no longer has any duty to perform. Due to his being Krishna conscious, all impiety within is instantly cleansed, an effect of many, many thousands of yajna performances. By such clearing of consciousness, one becomes fully confident of his eternal position in relationship with the Supreme. His duty thus becomes self-illuminated by the grace of the Lord, and therefore he no longer has any obligations to the Vedic injunctions. Such a Krishna-conscious person is no longer interested in material activities and no longer takes pleasure in material arrangements like wine, women, and similar infatuations. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Salakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So, as usual, we look in the context here, and we see that Krishna's been talking about a cycle of sacrifice for the demigods, and they're providing all the necessities. Remember those two words, annad bhavanti bhutani. If you just want to eat, then you have to depend on the land to grow food, and then you have to depend on the rain. The rain comes from the gods via sacrifice. Sacrifice is born of your prescribed duty according to your varna and ashram, and that's defined from the Vedas, and the Vedas are coming from Krishna, and so it all comes back to the Supreme. What was that phrase, Brahma? You remember that? That karma, Brahma Udbhavam. Brahma is the Vedas. If you want to understand your what to do, how to perform sacrifice, how to prosper in this world, then you have to consult the Vedas. So consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. One who does not follow this cycle, my dear Arjun, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin. Living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. In other words, without any disregard for God or the gods or anything, just whatever I can do to exploit this world or exploit other people and live in this world, that's called agayur, a life of sin. And it's Indriya Ramo. Indriya Ramo is exactly sense gratification. So such a person lives moga. Moga means useless. It doesn't really, you're not moving toward the goal of life, certainly. But, now you see this word I mentioned to you how this word tu is always a change. On the other hand, this word, the second word in the sentence, second verse we read today, Atmaratir eva syad. So this is someone, he's describing someone who's advanced in devotional service and is taking pleasure in his duties in Krishna consciousness. And so that they're not duties anymore. When you come to the platform of spontaneous attraction, what's the duty? We have a duty to get up in the morning, come and see the deities, and dance and chant. And if you don't do that, you're in trouble. But, after a certain point, let me go down and see Radha Giridhari, That's not a duty. That's a pleasure. That's spontaneous attraction. That is what real devotional service matures into. You come in because you're coming closer and closer to your natural state. The idea is, duty is something that's imposed from above for a higher purpose. Like you have to go into the army, to fight the war. Well, I remember back in the 60s, we were all figuring out how we could avoid that. Because nobody really accepted the validity of the authority. It was kind of a madness, That's what happens when the authorities become corrupt. But we accept the authorities of the Vedas because it's coming from Krishna. So when we come within the purview of the authority of the books that Prabhupada gave, and Prabhupada himself, then you're accepting it. Well, I accept this authority because I know that it's for my own good. See, this is the key difference. If your authority is is exploiting you for their own benefit, you're not tushta, you're not satisfied, and it's more like slavery. It's not something you want to do, it's something you have to do just to survive. But when you Krishna, this Atma Rati is an important thing. Pleasure in the self. Atma means the self, but it's the super self, it's Krishna. And Prabhupada makes it very clear in the first 5 words of the purport. A person who is fully Krishna conscious, fully satisfied by his action, no longer has a duty to perform. So the point is, at that point, it's not a question of duty, it's a question of pleasure. Prabhupada came to America and he spoke about Krishna consciousness and he wrote his books. It was all acts of devotion. The deities worship. There's so many things to perform. Anyone who gets involved in deity worship, you have to be on time, you have to say this mantra, you have to do it just right, you have to put tilak properly. Everything, and the dressing, everything has to be just right. Because there are rules coming down. We read, I think this morning, a Narada Pancharatra. There's a shastra given by Narada for the deity worship. So someone who's serious about deity worship wants to follow that, learns the mantras and all these things because will please the Lord, right? But we're not on that. We're not experiencing the direct rasa right away, but we're experiencing. This is very important. This is where the guru comes in, the personal guru. He's pleased when you do it right. Right? When you're meeting all of the criteria of being a devotee. And that's what gives you enlightenment. When the devotees first started, back in 22nd Avenue, what did they know about Krishna? Practically nothing. But they knew Srila Prabhupada. And they could see how enlivened he was. What he was giving them was valuable. That first kirtan, the first time you sit down, in those days mostly sitting, and just hearing kirtan and chanting, this is genuine, there's something going on here, and if you stay with it, you feel the benefits within a few days or less. So therefore there's a bond, there's a great gift that's been given, and Prabhupada's pouring out this knowledge, right, and just his personality, and so you feel like, I want to serve him. I know this is Satsu Maharaj explaining, he was one of the first devotees, who wrote the book. Prabhupada's coming from India, and he, in the course of time, you find out he likes mangoes. Mangoes were not unknown; they were being imported. I remember eating a mango, back in '68. Everything comes into New York. They buy everything, so you can get them. You can get mangoes, nice mangoes, right there in New York. So obviously, he decided to bring a mango to Prabhupada every day. And Prabhupada was delighted to get this mango, and that's an exchange of love and affection. So, and don't forget, every morning we sing that song, Shri Guru Charana Rati Aise Uttama Gati. Right? Shri Guru Charana Rati. So attraction for the lotus feet of the spiritual master is the best means of advancement. Gati there means advancement toward the goal. This is one of the amazing things about Sanskrit, is that the goal, Gati, also includes the means. The means toward the goal is developing affection for the spiritual master. Because then you're willing, then you're ready to do things that you're asked to do that you might never do before, simply because he wanted it done, and then you find yourself advancing very quickly. So that's the Atmarata. That's what's being explained here. If you're actually at the point of spontaneous attraction, you're taking pleasure, Atmarati, right? Taking pleasure in the self, taking pleasure in serving Krishna. Atma Triptas, you're satisfied, self-illuminated. Then the concept of duty kind of evaporates. It's all on the point of spontaneous attraction. So that's a very advanced state. So he's contrasting that with someone who's, all right, let's follow this chakra. Let's say do these yajnas so the rains will come, and will prosper and everything. That's kind of within the Vedic paradigm. So you're moving toward bhakti, but it's a far contrast between the verse we read today, the 17. So that's what Prabhupada is speaking here. The duty is self-illuminated by the grace of the Lord. It's the idea is that you know what's to be done because you're in touch with Krishna, and it melds, it dissolves into an exchange of love rather than an order and following the order. That's what's being spoken of here. Okay, next verse. Naivatasya kranaitarto. Excuse me. Naivatasya kratenarto. Nakrate kaschana. Achasya sarva bhuteshu. Kaschyadartha vipashriyah. A self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. Purport. A self-realized man is no longer obliged to perform any prescribed duty, save and except activities in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not inactivity either, as will be explained in the following verses. A Krishna conscious man does not take shelter of any person, man or demigod. Whatever he does in Krishna consciousness is sufficient in the discharge of his obligation. So this has come up before, how in the course of, I think, this chapter or previous chapter, that we're born into this world, we're debtors. Devashi bhutapta nrinam patrinam. These are all lists of people we're in debt to, just by living in the world. The devas, as described here, for supplying the necessities of life. The rishis, our teachers, for giving us knowledge that we can live in this world. People in general, other living beings, not even just human beings, the cows, we take it for granted, but we depend on it, all of these. Just like the insects. Normally we think, get rid of that insect. But insects are essential for life on this planet. Anyone who looks into it, they perform certain pollination for the bees, obviously, So all of these we take, we depend on. And we're debtors. And Devashibhuta Nunabatinam Nakinganayam Rini Charajan. Rini means the debtor. But one who takes shelter of Krishna and is simply serving him, then all the debts are forgiven. You're no longer a debtor. This is the wonderful thing about Krishna consciousness. And as far as duties go, well, okay, we have duties in Krishna consciousness. We have to do this. It's your turn to wash the pots, babu. Okay, let me go out and do it. So, but the idea is that that's a temporary arrangement. It's meant to purify our heart, purify our senses, purify our mind and consciousness through these linking activities, somehow or other. Gave the working senses and the knowledge acquiring senses. It's so much easier to say the karmendriya and jnanendriya. Karmendriya is what you do to work, the hands, voice, feet, excretion and reproduction. Those are the main ones. The voice for devotees. Practically everything is done through the voice. So all those senses, both the usual what we call senses, eyes, ears, there's a way of engaging them Krishna consciously. Obviously, the ears, you could be listening to a million different things right now, but you listen to me read the Bhagavad Gita. So that's hooking you up to the transcendence. Whereas all of the other stuff is burying you in the modes of nature. So how do we know what to do? That's the guidance of the Shastra, the Guru. Here's what you listen to. Here's what you don't listen to. If you want to achieve the goal of Krishna consciousness. It's as simple as that. So, that all of that is we accept duties in Krishna consciousness, understanding the ultimate aim. But as you proceed, you have no purpose to fulfill. You don't have your own purpose. You realize, the pure devotees, every breath they take, every step they take, is for the higher purpose of the Lord. You don't have any personal motivation in doing anything. This is what full surrender means. Is that what is that? Oh, there's a verse. Oh my God, I memorized this. I forgot the verse now, but it's an expansion, as we'll read in chapter 9. It's famous verse: Yat karoshi, yat ashnasi, yat judosi, tadasi yat tapassati kondi yat kurushamarapanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, give away, whatever sacrifice you perform, do it as an offering to me, Krishna says. This is the most confidential knowledge chapter. So so this is an expansion on that idea. Is that he goes through the list of everything you have. Your active senses, your knowledge-acquiring senses, your mind, your intelligence, all of that. If whatever you do with that, if the Namo Narayana, I do it as a sacrifice for Narayan. I'm doing this for Narayan. I'm doing this for Krishna, Radha and Krishna. That's the platform of pure devotion. And you can kind of see it. You saw it with Prabhupada. If you spend any time, or you see even just lifting up the phone, it's an act of devotion. Taking a step, taking a breath. This is what full Krishna consciousness means. You can imagine that. On the material side, you have your wife, your girlfriend, whatever it is, have your friends, and at a certain point you're with them, and there's a certain rasa you can exchange, right? Otherwise, it's maybe dreaming about it or remembering it, but it's not actually engaging in it, and it can be very frustrating. So imagine if, you've reached a state where Krishna is all-pervading. He's with us at every moment. If you can experience that relationship at every moment. Now, of course, there's the whole thing of separation and meeting, that just enhances the whole experience. But the point is, you're never separated from your most beloved, and whatever you do, you're doing that way. That's a platform of full satisfaction, obviously. So that's what this is. What he's talking about. That he has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of prescribed duties. There's a reason not to perform such work. So, in other words, you may be doing something. It doesn't matter what. You're doing it because it's connecting you to Krishna. It can be sweeping the floor, it can be dressing the deities, it can be chanting Hare Krishna, it can be selling books, whatever it is. The purpose is, this is pleasing to Krishna. And therefore it's giving you this higher pleasure. So he's describing that here. That, because after all, the overall context is he's trying to get Arjuna to fight this war. So he wants him to accept the duty, but he wants him to do it as a matter of devotion to himself. But the main thing is that he should see that this is you'll be self-situated and ultimately satisfied in this, much more so than what you think will be satisfying by not killing your relatives. They're going to die anyway. Now, everyone's getting killed on this battlefield except the Pandavas, basically. So you're not going to save their life, and you'll just be, deviating from your prescribed duties. Your name will be in the mud, and you won't be pleasing me. That's the big thing. So it's a lose-lose-lose situation. So this is part of his whole argument on that level, but it's also teaching us how to purify our activities, come to the point where they're satisfying simply because they're keeping us linked up to Krishna. And that's a whole different way to live. because otherwise, if you're on the material plane, you're always dissatisfied. Even if you succeed in some plan, it soon becomes dry. Like these billionaires. If you become a billionaire, there's so many perks. You can have so many houses and this and that. But then you look around. Hey, I only got $1 billion. Are you kidding? Look, Bezos has 100 billion. Who am I? Just a measly little billionaire. In other words, it's never satisfying. It always becomes stale. But Krishna consciousness is actually ever fresh when you experience it. The same mantra, the same name. When you become pure, it's every syllable is dripping with nectar. Madhuram madhurebhyopi mangalebhyopi mangalam. The great devotees, they experience the sweetest of the sweet. And the sweetness never stops. They're never satiated. That means it's not material. So as soon as you taste a little bit of that, you can see how foolish it is to place your faith in the material sense gratification. As it's said so eloquently here by Krishna. Agayur indriyaramo mogang parthasa jivati. Those who are living simply for the sense pleasure are living a sinful life and wasting the human form of life. All right, we come to a Tasmat verse. Tasmat means the end of an argument. Tasmat asakta satatam kayam karma samachara asakto yacharan karma padamapnoti purushaha. Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty. For by working without attachment, one attains the Supreme. Purport. The Supreme is the personality of Godhead for the devotees, and liberation for the impersonalist. A person, therefore, acting for Krishna or in Krishna consciousness, under proper guidance and without attachment to the result of the fruit of the work, is certainly making progress toward the supreme goal of life. Arjuna is told that he should fight in the battle of Kurukshetra for the interest of Krishna, because Krishna wanted him to fight. To be a good man or a non-violent man is a personal attachment, but to act on behalf of the Supreme is to act without attachment for the result. That is perfect action of the highest degree, recommended by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Vedic rituals, like prescribed sacrifices, are performed for purification of impious activities that were performed in the field of sense gratification. But action in Krishna consciousness is transcendental to the reactions of good or evil work. A Krishna-conscious person has no attachment for the result, but acts on behalf of Krishna alone. He engages in all kinds of activities, but is completely non-attached. So this is the real mystery of action in Krishna consciousness, because it looks like we're doing all this stuff, but we're not making any money, and we're not enjoying very much. Simple clothes. I mean, this wardrobe I've had for years and years. The whole thing, cost maybe $50. I've got a bunch of these kurtas and everything. I just have to do my laundry once a week, But to find a matching pair, that's my worry every morning. That's it, But it's such a liberation, not to have to worry about am I keeping up with the fashion, and all this stuff. Isn't it just blow it off. Who cares? If you're out of the whole game, let's be honest. You're out of the whole game and trying to attract the opposite sex. It doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, if you're old and you're not Krishna conscious, it's very depressing. Because no matter how good your wardrobe is, you can't get the girls. But if you're old and you're Hare Krishna, you're taking pleasure by then. As we just read that, as we were reading that in the morning in classes, Kala Kanya, the daughter of time, the Jara, old age, So, but really, it's kind of a joke. It's a relief, actually. The senses are kind of quieted down, and everything, and what's left is your, Krishna consciousness. Plus, you're looking at the imminence of your, hopefully going back to Godhead. But so it's a different world. And so that's why, he's saying you should do your duty, because, especially, it's being given by me. In other words, the whole point is he's standing on this chariot or sitting on the chariot with Krishna right there. Because I want you to do it, that should be enough for you to do the duty. And if you do it properly, it's not going to feel like a duty. It's going to feel like an act of love. It's different. Whereas if you do your duty prescribed by the Vedas, and everything, then it becomes official. And the benefit, boy, I'm getting rid of some bad reactions. So it's good I'm doing this. Now in Krishna consciousness, we're doing that also. I'm hearing a series of lectures Prabhupada gave that was made into a book, Second Chance. You ever see that book? Ajamil. And I'm hearing the lectures from which that book was compiled. And Prabhupada, again and again, it's right there in the text of the Bhagavatam. But it's very pertinent to this because the previous chapter, the end of the 5th canto, Shukadeva is describing all these hells that are suffered by people who perform grievous sins. And it's all hair-raising, and it's really disturbing. Anyone who's a sensitive Vaishnava like Parikshit, he hears about all this suffering, and the first thing he wants to know is, well, how can people avoid that suffering? And so Shukadeva tells him, you know what he described to him in the very beginning? The process of prayaschitta. Prayaschitta means atonement. This is material. And it's there in the Vedas, various sacrifices or austerities you can perform to neutralize the sins, so that you more or less get rid of them. But what's the problem? It doesn't neutralize. It doesn't get rid of the desire to perform the sins. It's still waiting there in the heart, and in the right circumstance, it'll come out. Just like addiction, we talk. So Parikshit says that it's like this famous bathing of an elephant, elephant bathing, So then he tells the story of Ajamil. Now Ajamil was raised as a Brahmin, maybe not a pure Vaishnava, but he was, he worshipped Narayan, like that. So in the middle, he's going out into the forest to collect wood. This is a traditional duty for brahmacharis and things, go out and collect some wood for the fire. So he's coming back, maybe he had a load of wood, Suddenly he sees a Sudra couple embracing, having sex basically in the forest, So he loses it. He's a young man, It's kind of, it's amazing to think about. Well, big deal, you see that all the time. I mean, but in those days, it was, that was very exceptional. Anyway, so he became attracted. He had a wife. He gave up his wife. He married a prostitute who was in the forest, So then the next thing, he has all these kids. And he becomes like dacoit, he's doing all this nefarious, he's lost it, his Brahminical qualities. But he has the presence of mind to name his kids after the names of God. Prabhupada says on the tape that this is traditionally done in India. So that while you're just calling your son, you're also calling Narayan or Krishna or Govinda or whatever. So you're getting credit for that. So the scene shifts to he's about to die. He's 80 some odd years old. He has a young son, which indicates, he hasn't taken vanaprastha or sannyas. He's been having sex into his old age, which is sinful. So anyway, the story. I mean, he's about to die, and all of the Yamadutas come. Scary. I mean, you go to a hospital, you talk to the nurses. There's something called terminal restlessness. Have you ever heard of that? That's where people say, "What is it? Those dogs are coming," or something. They get very, very agitated when they're about to die. And the nurses know that, okay, it's time to give them some sedatives. So this is just terminal restlessness. That means he's going to go. No, he's starting to see the Yamadutas coming. So it's described, he's frightened, he's scared. His little boy is playing in the corner because he can't see the Yamaduta. And he calls out, "Narayan!" It's a wonderful thing. There's an editing aspect to it because they're reading from a manuscript. The book hasn't been published, apparently. So, at least in one of the lectures. So he says, "Narayan, Narayan, Narayan," 3 times. Robert said, 3 times? Once is enough. Is that what the manuscript says? And he says, it says 3 times in Prabhupada. So he changed it just once. It's enough. So then it expands also. Not only was it that once that he chanted that he became free of sin. Because the Yamadutas say, what are you doing here? The Vishnudutas come when he calls out Narayan. They don't know who they are. But they're impressed how beautiful, and how authoritative they are, And they're stopped by the Vishnudutas. So they went, well, what are you doing? We're working for the Chief Justice, Yamaraj, and he's obviously sinful. They start recounting his life. This is where you hear about his life. And it's very sinful. So what's the problem? So the Vishnudutas laugh. He said, you don't know you don't know the first thing about who's sinful, who isn't, because they didn't know the power of the holy name. So I think the Vishnudutas tell him, and then they go back to Yamaraj, and he really explains about the holy name, how powerful it is for getting rid of sins. But he was actually, because he was calling his son, he wasn't uttering the name offensively. He wasn't calculating. I'm so sinful, but now I'm, chanting Hare Krishna. I'll get rid of the sin. I can keep doing my nefarious business. He wasn't thinking like that. Therefore, he wasn't offensive, even though he was chanting the names of his sons. He wasn't really indicating Narayan. But that's inoffensive chanting, and that clears away your sin. So even though he was doing all this nefarious stuff, it kept getting cleaned away. Anyway, so he's saved from dying. Obviously, he gets a second chance. And he hears the conversation, so he realizes what happens. So as soon as he gets his health back a little bit, he leaves. He takes sannyas, goes to the Himalayas, because it's not enough to get prema from chanting inoffensively. Just by chanting Namabhas, the kind of chanting we're doing, we're staying on the sinless platform. Assuming we're chanting offenselessly. So anyway, he has some more work to do, and eventually he becomes completely pure. The same Vishnudutas come, take him back to Godhead. And the whole point is the power of the chanting for purification. So there's two aspects. One is if we're conscious of the need to avoid, losing this human form of life and going down into the species because of so much sin, then we should definitely chant. To get rid of that. We'll, in 1 second. You didn't have the mic. But that's just the preliminary, benefit. The real benefit of the chanting is attaining love of God, which includes liberation completely. That's a secondary affair, So that's what's, he's saying, just do your duty for the sake of doing it, without attachment, and do it for me, and you'll attain the supreme goal. All right, go ahead, Sunil. You have a question?
Is there a meaning of saying Narayan and having Narayana with the in the end?
It's just a colloquial. Literally, it's Narayana. It's not even Narayan. Everyone says Narayan. But it's actually Narayana is the proper pronunciation. But these names, they become so common that they kind of. There's also the colloquial pronunciation that you use. That's all that was. There's no significance in it. If we want to be, we should try to pronounce precisely. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and then you get the full benefit. Alrighty, let's do another one. Text 20, right? Okay. Karmanaivahi samsiddhim astita janakadayaha lokasangraham evapi sampashyam kartum arhasi. Kings such as Janaka attain perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. Purport. Kings like Janaka were all self-realized souls. Consequently, they had no obligation to perform the prescribed duties in the Vedas. Nonetheless, they performed all prescribed activities just to set examples for the people in general. Janaka was the father of Sita and father-in-law of Lord Sri Ram. Being a great devotee of the Lord, he was transcendentally situated. But because he was the king of Mithila, a subdivision of Bihar province in India, he had to teach his subjects how to perform prescribed duties. Lord Krishna and Arjuna, the Lord's eternal friend, had no need to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra, But they fought to teach people in general that violence is also necessary in a situation where good arguments fail. Before the Battle of Kurukshetra, every effort was made to avoid the war, even by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the other party was determined to fight. So, for such a right cause, there is a necessity for fighting. Although one who is situated in Krishna consciousness may not have any interest in the world, he still works to teach the people how to live and how to act. Experienced persons in Krishna consciousness can act in such a way that others will follow, and this is explained in the following verse. So this is the verse coming up. This principle of acting properly in order to teach others. The great devotees, they really have no obligations, and we find in some of the behavior of, say, Nityananda, and the avadut principle, which means beyond any rules and regulations. So, but at other times, they'll follow very strictly for teaching. So Srila Prabhupada, in his preaching activities, he also did that. He would come, to the programs. He would show us how to chant japa, and he would do it. There's a famous instance where he actually got down on all fours and mopped the floor in L.A. to show them how it's done. Proper way to mop. Probably. So that's an act of compassion. You come down to this platform, for the sake of all people who don't know anything, and then you can they'll learn. Otherwise, how will they learn? That's the idea. So that's one of the principles of acharya. The acharya means someone who knows the shastra, lives according to the tenets, and teaches. And so part of that teaching is showing by example. That's why the mask was such a big deal. If the president doesn't wear a mask, then it becomes a thing, right? Not to wear the mask. And so many thousands of people die because of that. So when you're in a position of leadership, then you have a greater responsibility, obviously. And Krishna recognized that. So that brings us to the next verse, very famous verse. Yadyadatadati shreshtas tattadeve tarojanaha sayat pramanam kurute lokas tarunuvartate. This is one of the famous verses of this chapter. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Purport: people in general always require a leader who can teach the public by practical behavior. A leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. Lord Chaitanya said that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. One who teaches in that way is called acharya, or the ideal teacher. Therefore, a teacher must follow the principles of Shastra, scripture, to teach the common man. The teacher cannot manufacture rules against the principles of revealed scriptures. The revealed scriptures, like Manu Samhita and similar others, are considered the standard books to be followed by human society. Thus, the leader's teaching should be based on the principles of such standard shastras. One who desires to improve himself must follow these standard rules as they are practiced by the great teachers. The Srimad Bhagavatam also affirms that one should follow in the footsteps of great devotees, and that is the way of progress on the path of spiritual realization. The king or the executive head of a state, the father and the school teacher are all considered to be natural leaders of the innocent people in general. All such natural leaders have a great responsibility to their dependents. Therefore, they must be conversant with the standard books of moral and spiritual codes. So this brings us back to the verse by Rishabdev, which has, I think, it been cited lately in our morning classes. Guru na satsyat, swajano na satsat, pita na satsat, janani na satsat, daivan na tatsan, napatishta satsyan, namochiyedyak samabeta mrityam. One should not become a guru or a father or a husband or a mother or wife or a deva if one cannot deliver his dependents from the clutches of birth and death. And part of that deliverance is teaching, not only orally, but also by example. And so, in other words, it's a life of responsibility. The life responsibility. And that is what it means to be a society, is that you're helping each other to be Krishna conscious. And part of that help is to show by example. Prabhupada did it, and his leaders did it, and it's a principle that's universal. So this is another reason for Arjun to do what's right, because he's a leader on the battlefield. If he leaves the battlefield, it's not going to be a very good example. And then Prabhupada, he emphasizes here how the word pramana is here. You see that? Pramana. Pramana is a very important word for us, because the original pramana, this is a source of evidence that you accept. From the pramana, you get prameyas. I went through, I think, was it last night or this morning, the 10 roots. So you have prameyas are these different points of philosophy that we live by, we understand. Well, how do you know? This is all beyond the ability of logic and reason to understand. Well, you accept this higher teaching. Now, Amnaya. Amnaya is the Shastra. Those who live the Shastra and teach the Shastra, the gurus and the great acharyas, This is our source of knowledge. Not our senses, because our senses are notoriously imperfect. And the whole effort to build up a philosophy just on your own reason and what you can see and is ultimately a failure, because it cannot reach beyond the limits of the senses and beyond the limits of the mind. There's this word for Krishna called adhokshaja. Adhokshaja. And real dharma is that which invokes your bhakti, your love for adhokshaja. What does adhokshaja mean? That person who's beyond the reach of your material senses and mind. In other words, transcendental. Well, this is the difficulty. How are you going to build up bhakti or relationship or anything for someone or something who's beyond your ability to see or to know? There has to be that intermediary source of knowledge, beginning with the Shastra and those who have realized the Shastra. So that pramana, in this case, is the activities, achar, of the Shrestha, the great souls, the respectable leader in any field. And that's why, Kali Yuga is such a dangerous age. Because the standards, people don't accept the natural standards. So who becomes a leader? Some con man, who can convince the people that, I'll protect your wealth and so forth. And in other words, the whole thing becomes degraded. And it's a very dangerous situation in society. When you're not following the God-given rules, then you get what we have today. The climate is being destroyed, people's minds are being destroyed. I'm convinced. I'll tell you a little story, because ISKCON has a history now over 50 years, and as many of you know, Prabhupada wanted to have ideal schools too, Gurukul schools, and these developed first in Dallas and all over the world, and there was a problem in the schools. It didn't exactly meet the criteria. So there was a school in Alachua, and Alachua, Florida. That's where we have a nice farm community, And there was a lady there who was teaching for years and years. She was well known, teaching the girls school. She had a partner there who was still there, and it was well known. People would send their kids there from all over. And then one year, somehow I heard, because I'm not part of the community. I would visit there twice a year, and then this year I couldn't go because of COVID. And we heard that the school had to be shut down. And then a few years later, I asked her, "Well, what happened with that school?" And she told me cell phones. Once the girls all had cell phones, and once one girl gets, all have to have, So they had cell phones. And naturally, these young girls, if you can't control, they were getting on their cell phones. And when there's the boys' school, there's the boys' school, they had their cell phones, So they were texting each other and communicating. They couldn't control that. And so, liaisons were developing, and they had to shut it down. So what is that cell phone? That opens up a whole channel of communication and knowledge that has nothing to do with this transcendental, pramana. It's a Tower of Babel, what's out there. Anything goes. So that what we accept as evidence or authority of how to understand the world, how to understand ourselves, and how to act in the world, that's what guides us in our life. And for most people, what is it? I don't even want to speculate. This news, that news, some conspiracy theory, a million different things. You can create your own series of pramanas on your phone or your little tablet, like that. And it's a very dangerous situation because there's no common understanding. In the old days in India, everyone, the Vedas. Okay, not everyone could follow, but at least they respected the Vedas, they accept the Vedas, and probably the Manu Samhita, So Prabhupada, this is why, we were so, sacrificed so much to write these books, to set up a source of knowledge that at least people who are trying to be sane and who are practicing devotion would accept as the final authority. And so what could be more of an authority than Krishna's own words, All right, so we'll end it there, and we'll pick this up next week and Monday. I'm going to start on text 22, but I've left time for a couple of little verses, special verses for you. So this is one that doesn't have a poem, but it's a verse that, these things, they're all friends, the verses, but sometimes you forget them or you don't use them. And I happened to talk to, through the one Zoom class with a devotee in Columbus, who I know. He's a young boy who grew up in a devotee family. His name is Hari. I would always tell him Hari Das, not just Hari, So he's a very nice boy. He's in college now, and he's into shlokas. So he said, "Here's one you taught me years ago." He says, "Oh, really? What's that?" No, I can't remember it. God. Forget how the Sanskrit goes now. But he's saying that for those who are, here it is, sangsara sindhamati dushtanamurti, once you get the first word, sangsara sindhamati dushtanamurti tirshur, nanak plavo bhagavatak purushottamasya, lilakatavasa nishevanam pungso bhaved vivada dukkha dabaritasya. Now this verse comes almost at the end of a chapter in the 12th canto, describing all these different kinds of annihilations. Universal annihilation, and then there's various stages of partial annihilation. Then there's our own personal annihilation when we die. Each time we die, that's in our own annihilation. So it's kind of a little depressing, So here he says, but here is the one and only boat for those who are eager to cross over the ocean of birth and death, suffering, samsara sindhum, the ocean of samsara. Ati dushtaram, this is very difficult to cross over. Utti tirshur, but utti tirshur means those who are very eager to cross over. You have to have that idea. Nanyak palo, there's only one boat. Of course, there's several other verses that gives other boats, but he says there's only one boat. Bhagavatak purushottamassa lila katha rasa nishevanam. Cultivating the rasa, the taste, for the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rasa nishevanam antadena pungso bhaved vivada dukkha davarjitavsya. Those who are suffering, the buried in severe miseries of this fire, burning in the forest fire of this world. So he's got the ocean and the forest fire in one verse there. So if you want to cross over, get out of this forest fire of material life and cross over the ocean of birth and death, then you got to develop an attachment for Krishna's pastimes. Rather than our own, little activities. Everyone's always wondering about it. So when you get absorbed in Krishna's pastimes, just like this beautiful, wonderful month of Kartik, you can think of those delightful baby pastimes of Krishna, So, in that regard, just real quick, Rupa Goswami has written this book called Leela Chanda, which is a series of Chanda verses, means very special verses, describing Krishna's pastimes in summary form. So, near the beginning, he describes the little baby pastimes. Autanaka Mahasankulitambaka Shakadadastana Shayanadambaka Kuchadasa Trishna Vidichita Rodana Chanchata Patikata Shakada Vinodana. You can learn this? You don't know it now, but you can learn it. So Uttana ceremony. This is the Vedic culture. You know, the little boy is born, you know. And you know, little babies, they just lie in their back, you know. So when they're getting a little bit older and they turn on their belly and they start crawling, this is a festival. It's called the Uttana ceremony. When they turn over and start moving. So Krishna, they were just celebrating Uttana. It's only for the mothers with children. So Mother Yashoda had invited everybody, you know. So she placed little Krishna under this handcart in a little cradle. You know, he was safe there. But he wanted to suck her breast. So she's busy with all the guests. So he's crying a little bit, and he's kicking his legs. He knocks down this cart, big heavy cart with all these utensils, you know. Out there, Shakadarastana Shayana Alambaka. Alambaka means resting. Kucha Dasa Trishna. He had great thirst for sucking the breast. Kucha Dasa Trishna Vidichita Rodana. He started crying. Chanchada Patikata Shakada Vinodana. And his hand, moving his feet, Chanchada Patikata Shakadamana. He did the destruction of that Shakatastra cart. So then, what happened to the baby? You know? Well, there's just a big pile of pots and pans, and the axle's broken, you know. And there was Krishna. He was just in a little corner. He wasn't hurt. Oh, thank God, you know. What happened? They asked the little boys. Prabhupada says in the Krishna book, they were assigned to play with him and to watch the boy, you know. So they're watching him, and he's kicking his thing. So he kicked it down, you know. Yeah, right. The little children. No way he could kick it down. It's so heavy, you know. So they didn't believe, you know. Mother is shouting, you know. So this is the Krishna's child. So imagine, you know, you have a whole poem like that. That's just 1 meter, you know, and for each pastime it has a different meter. So, you know, so the language is very beautiful. It's materially also attractive. So it attracts the mind, and then what the attraction is really there for Krishna. So we should try to cultivate that. So now we are run out of time. Oh, glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol. Autanaka Mahasankulitambaka